I finally did something with my personal site domain. Despite being non-technical, I used tools like Cursor and Replit to help me build something from scratch, and it kind of turned out exactly the way I was hoping. It's clean with a minimalist aesthetic and pops of personality, like when you hover over the word bananagrams, it turns into bananagram styles. It's got a project repository and a blog, so I can write about things that interest me. It's mobile friendly and performant, but it was a process to get it to that point. I spent the last 5.5 years building a venture-backed transportation technology startup, and it was unreal. But I'm really excited to spend the next few months tinkering, exploring, and just indulging my curiosities. And I figured, why not share the process a little bit more publicly? I am a longtime internet lurker, so this is super uncomfortable for me. But sharing forces me to structure my reflections, and so I'll probably spend the next 5 minutes sharing some of my key learnings from this first project, and maybe even end with a little bit of a live feature build out as somebody non-technical. So I started this project using Replit and Replit Agent. And I did that because Replit Agent is super quick, frankly. And it was a really easy process for me to get started with iterating on different directions I might want to head with the personal site. But Replit Agent also obfuscates a lot of the decision making, and it's really agentic. That meant I wasn't learning too much about what was going on behind the scenes, which meant I couldn't build on top of it the way I wanted. So after deciding the visual direction that I wanted to go in, I took to Figma, did a little bit more tinkering, and then decided to start a project in Cursor. Now, this was probably one of my first early key learnings, which was I could choose to do things really fast, or I could choose to do them right and learn along the way. And I think investing in some of the foundational skills for 10 or 15 minutes before starting this project, like learning Git and understanding version control, probably saved me like 5 or 6 hours throughout this project. And that was exactly what I did. So I invested in, okay, let me figure out how Git works, what GitHub is, and how a real software engineer would go about starting a new project. And once I did that, I was kind of on a run with Cursor Agent, Chat, and Composer. Second big learning was I was kind of surprised by how far the AI code gen tools were able to take me. I was expecting to hit a wall when it comes to customizability or building things that felt like they had some sort of craft behind them. But there was a lot of little features and interesting trinkets I could build throughout the site that I was really proud of. Things like this floating table of contents on the blog, inspired by Notion, that follows you as you scroll through the page. Big learning number 3, and this was probably one of the biggest ones, was it's way too easy to offload all of the important decision making to these agents. I really often found myself hitting accept, accept, accept to every single suggestion without pausing to ask why. And that really came to a head when I showed my dad the site and he said, hey, why is this in React? And I knew there was probably a good reason, but I had no clue what the answer was. And it was really clear that I'd, from the get-go, offloaded really critical decision-making to the agent when I probably shouldn't have. And so after that point, I was really intentional about pausing and inserting myself into the decision-making process, even if it was to just learn why certain suggestions were being made. And one place that kind of manifested was this project section. The agents were suggesting, let's integrate a free CMS or content management system, or let's integrate with a backend as a service like Supabase. But I wanted to keep the site pretty lightweight. And so whether it was the right or wrong decision, I inserted myself into the decision-making process and decided that, you know what, I'm going to be updating these blogs and projects pretty infrequently. So I'm okay with, I'm okay with going ahead and just having a data folder where I have those projects stored, or a blog folder with all the different blog pages. And again, whether that was the right or the wrong decision, I feel like I understood the decision-making process and the pros and cons of the different suggestions being made. Okay, last and the biggest learning was that deployments suck. It was so hard to get this thing actually live. I probably spent 4 or 5 hours actually building and tweaking the personal site, and I probably spent 4 hours trying to actually get it deployed and working. And I finally understood all the jokes that the engineers that I've worked with throughout my life make. Everything was working totally beautifully locally, but every time I would try and actually deploy to Vercel, I was getting a build failed, build failed, build failed, and I was polluting my main branch, which is when I learned about staging environments. I was polluting my main branch with a bunch of test fixes. and I couldn't figure out how to get this to work. It was also surprising that the code gen tools, ChatGPT and Claude, really struggled with trying to figure out what was wrong as well. Eventually, I got things to deploy, and I got, hey, build, successful. And I was so excited. And I opened the page, and it was just a blank white page. Again, for some reason, everything was working so wonderfully locally, but not working when I deployed it. And I was so close to giving up, but came back with a fresh perspective the next day and was able to figure things out. Overall, incredibly fun process. Learned a lot, but most importantly, learned how to learn better during the next project. Last little clip of this video, hopefully, if I'm able to get it to work, I wanted to spend 10, 15 minutes trying to build out a new feature. I have a whole bunch of just unbaked thoughts, little insights that I like to keep track of, or I want to keep better track of, and that I'm kind of okay subtly publishing to the world. And so I wanted to add a little button here next to my GitHub profile that is like an unbaked thoughts section. And unlike my projects and blog posts, which are like truly baked directly into the code base, there's a, let me move this a little bit. There's a data folder here, and the projects are baked directly in there. There's blog post pages, and those are going to be edited with such low frequency that I was okay having to edit the code base and then redeploy every time I want to make a change here. But these unbaked thoughts, these are things that I want to really be able to edit on the go when, I have a thought or an insight. And so this, I feel like I probably want to connect to some data source. And ultimately, I think that Notion makes the most sense given that I use it for another number of other things, and it's just incredibly accessible in my pocket. So over the next 10 minutes, my goal is connect to the Notion API in a way that is safe, secure, and attack-proof, and pull basically this database that I have in Notion called Nuggets, just like nuggets of thoughts, I suppose, into the new page I add onto my personal site. Let's see how it goes. I've never worked with the Notion API before, but I have a handy guide here. Okay, so part of the reason that I was taking the approach that I was that I didn't want to set up Vercel's serverless functions, and I didn't want to have to use a backend as a service like Supabase, given that this is supposed to be a pretty simple personal site. But it turns out that doing Notion's API calls client side would expose my token API key, which I probably shouldn't do. And so, okay, I can go ahead and use Vercel's serverless functions, which I don't really know how to do yet. I can go ahead and set up Supabase to do this, but I still kind of wanted something simpler to start. And part of me thinks that, as ridiculous as it might sound, a public Google Sheet might be the way to go, because Google makes it really easy to call these read-only sheets and extract data in a CSV format from them. And so I think that's the approach that I'm going to take.